In the heart of New Bern, North Carolina, a stately brick mansion stands quietly under the evening sky. Its tall windows, once aglow with warm light and lively gatherings, are dark now, reflecting only the pale moonlight. Inside these walls, history lingers in motes of dust that dance in the hush. This house, known in its day as the Bradham Estate, bears silent witness to a tale of ambition and heartbreak. Decades ago, its halls echoed with the footsteps of a man who reached extraordinary heights and then lost everything. On a cold February night in 1934, behind those shuttered windows, the once proud master of this house lay on his bed, the weight of years and regrets heavy on his chest. Caleb Bradham, the man who had given the world Pepsi Cola, was breathing his last. The mansion that had been a symbol of his triumph now watched over his final moments in mournful silence. Beyond the thick walls, the world went on, unaware that a visionary was fading away, alone with the ghosts of his shattered dreams. It hadn't always been this way. In decades past, these rooms had brimmed with life, with music, with the clinking of glasses in toast to success. The air once smelled of fresh-cut flowers and rich tobacco as esteemed guests arrived to celebrate fortunes made. So how did a home built on hope and prosperity become a monument to loss? To answer that, we must travel back to the beginning, back to the late 19th century, when a young pharmacist named Caleb Bradham first dared to dream beyond the counter of a humble drugstore. Caleb Bradham's story began far from the elegant home where it would one day end. He was born in 1867 in the piney flatlands of eastern North Carolina, in a place where life was simple and opportunities were scarce. His father George kept a general store, and from a young age Caleb had helped out, learning how to weigh sugar and coffee, mind the ledger, and greet customers with a smile. In those post-Civil War years, the South was still recovering, and Caleb's hometown of Chinquapin was a modest crossroads of farms and turpentine plantations. As a child, Caleb helped his family with chores by day and studied by kerosene lamp at night. Books were precious in his household, and he devoured every volume he could get his hands on. He showed a particular fascination with science and medicine. Neighbors would recall the inquisitive boy mixing up herbal remedies from kitchen spices and quizzing the local doctor whenever he came through. From early on, Caleb dreamed of making his mark beyond the swamps and pine forests of Duplin County. As a boy, Caleb learned the values of hard work and hope from his parents, who scraped by in the lean years after the Civil War. He was ambitious and bright, a dreamer with a disarming smile and an endless curiosity about the world beyond his small town. In the 1880s, young Caleb left home to pursue an education that might lift him to great things. He entered the University of North Carolina with plans to become a doctor, his heart set on healing others. Late nights, by a flickering lamp, he pored over thick medical texts, envisioning a future of promise. But fate intervened cruelly. Partway through his studies, word arrived that his father's business had collapsed, leaving the family finances in ruin. Caleb's tuition money evaporated overnight. With a heavy heart, he packed his bags and left medical school behind. The train ride back home was a bitter one. The dreams he carried seemed to dim with each mile. Back in North Carolina, Caleb refused to let misfortune mark the end of his aspirations. He took a job teaching at a local academy, sharing his knowledge with young students while quietly nursing his own deferred dreams. But the world of medicine still called to him. Before long, he found a new path: pharmacy. After apprenticing in a Baltimore drugstore and earning his pharmacist's license in 1895, Caleb Bradham opened a small pharmacy in the coastal town of New Bern. The Bradham Drug Company, as it was soon known, sat on a bustling corner of downtown New Bern. Its door jingled with the comings and goings of townsfolk in search of remedies and conversation. Inside, wooden shelves bowed under the weight of apothecary jars and medicinal tinctures. In one corner, a marble-topped soda fountain fizzed and bubbled, a gathering spot for neighbors on warm afternoons. Caleb, now in his 20s, found joy behind that counter. With his white pharmacist's coat and earnest eyes, he welcomed everyone by name. He had a knack not just for filling prescriptions, but for mixing delightful concoctions to quench thirst and lift spirits. It was here, amid the clatter of glassware and the sweet scent of syrups, that inspiration struck. One slow summer day, Caleb began experimenting with new flavors at the soda fountain. He combined exotic cola nut extract with fragrant vanilla and a handful of other secret ingredients, seeking a tonic that could soothe and invigorate. He believed such a drink might even aid digestion, a liquid cure for the common bellyache. After a few trials, he poured a caramel-colored liquid into a glass, added a dash of fizz, and took a sip. The taste was crisp and refreshing, with a hint of something spicy sweet. Pleased, Caleb shared it with a few regular customers lounging at the counter. His young assistant, James Henry King, was the first to taste the concoction and reportedly nodded in approval at the very first sip. Soon, Caleb was serving the drink to anyone who cared to try it, and none could get enough. Folks began bringing their friends from across town to Bradham's pharmacy just to taste this new concoction. Some claimed it eased their indigestion and gave them a lift on a hot day. "Fix me another glass of that Pepsi Cola drink," one satisfied customer quipped, unwittingly giving Caleb the spark for what to call it next. His friends promptly dubbed it Brad's drink after its creator, and the name stuck around town. As the drink's popularity grew, Caleb realized he needed a proper name for his creation. In 1898, he rechristened it Pepsi Cola. The name was a bold one. Pepsi evoked the word dyspepsia, a nod to the stomach ailments the drink might ease, while cola paid homage to the cola nut that gave it flavor. It sounded medicinal, yet refreshing, just the image Caleb wanted. As Pepsi Cola's reputation began to grow, it even drew the attention of its older rival, Coca-Cola. The Atlanta company bristled at this upstart using the term cola. There were rumblings of legal action and stern letters exchanged, but Caleb stood his ground. "There's room enough in this country for 2 colas," he reportedly quipped to colleagues, and he pressed on undeterred. A local artist and friend, pioneering female photographer Bayard Wooten, soon created an elegant swirling logo for the brand. With a distinctive name and identity in place, Caleb's fizzy concoction was ready to take on the world beyond New Bern. By 1902, the demand for Pepsi Cola had grown so much that Caleb took a leap of faith. He turned over the day-to-day pharmacy duties to an assistant and formally founded the Pepsi Cola Company. Working out of the cramped back room of his drugstore, he stirred giant vats of syrup, perfected his recipe, and filled orders for other soda fountains beyond his hometown. That same year, on a crisp December day, he filed paperwork to incorporate Pepsi Cola. A few months later, the Pepsi Cola trademark was officially registered, emblazoning his drink's name in the ledgers of commerce. Caleb's once humble hobby was fast becoming a lucrative enterprise. In 1903, he moved production out of the little drugstore and into a dedicated facility nearby, where the sweet aroma of Pepsi syrup soon perfumed the air. Barrels of the concentrate were prepared to be shipped to drugstores and soda fountains across the state. As cork-lined bottles clinked and machinery hummed, Caleb realized he was building something far bigger than a local treat. He had given up on becoming a doctor, but in a way, his new potion was reaching more people than any prescription ever could. It wasn't just a drink, it was becoming a symbol of youthful energy and American enterprise. Caleb also proved to be a marketing pioneer. He made sure the Pepsi Cola name was everywhere, painted on brick walls, printed in newspapers, and displayed on soda fountain signs. "Drink Pepsi Cola, delicious and healthful," one slogan urged, appealing to consumers with the promise that his beverage was not only tasty but beneficial. Another early advertisement touted Pepsi Cola as invigorating and refreshing, aids digestion, positioning it as more than a mere treat, almost a health tonic. In 1909, automobile racing pioneer Barney Oldfield became Pepsi's first celebrity endorser, appearing in newspaper ads that praised Pepsi Cola as a bully drink, refreshing, invigorating, a fine bracer before a race. By marrying bold claims with folksy charm, Caleb cultivated a loyal following and kept Pepsi Cola in the public eye, even as he expanded operations. Before long, Pepsi Cola was leaping beyond state lines. In 1905, Caleb began selling Pepsi syrup to independent bottlers, allowing them to bottle the drink in their own towns. For the first time, Pepsi Cola was not just flowing from soda fountains but being sold in glass bottles that customers could carry home. At first it was just 2 bottling franchises in North Carolina, then a handful more in neighboring Virginia. Caleb, ever the energetic salesman, traveled by train with crates of syrup and bold ideas, persuading entrepreneurs in one town after another to join his growing network. Each new bottler meant Pepsi reached new lips and new hearts. By 1906, bottling plants were springing up under the Pepsi banner across the South, and the business was gaining momentum like a locomotive picking up steam. By the end of the decade, Caleb Bradham's bold venture had exploded into a national phenomenon. Pepsi Cola franchises sprouted like wildflowers from coast to coast. By 1910, over 200 bottlers, some say nearly 300, were producing Pepsi Cola in 24 states, from the Carolinas to California. The name Pepsi-Cola was becoming a household word, spoken in the same breath as its older rival, Coca-Cola. Caleb had achieved what few could imagine. He turned a local soda fountain novelty into a thriving empire. With success came rewards that once seemed like distant fantasies. In 1908, at the height of his prosperity, Caleb purchased one of New Bern's most splendid residences, a 3-story brick mansion that instantly became known as the Bradham Estate. This was the very house whose lonely silence we saw at the beginning of our tale, but in those days it was full of life. Built in the mid-1800s by a wealthy merchant, the mansion boasted grand Greek Revival details and ornate iron balconies. Inside, Italian marble fireplaces graced the parlors, and even the door hinges were made of polished silver. It had even served as headquarters for a Union general during the Civil War. Now it would be Caleb Bradham's family home. He moved in with his wife, Charity, and their young children, filling the stately rooms with warmth. Laughter and piano music drifted out of the open windows on summer evenings. To New Bern citizens, the sight of Caleb on the mansion's columned porch, greeting guests with a genial smile, was a testament to how far a local boy with a big idea could climb. By then, Caleb Bradham was more than just a businessman. He had become a pillar of the community and even a figure of statewide renown. He served as president of the People's Bank of New Bern, chaired the County Board of Commissioners, and was a leading member of the Shriners. In the North Carolina Naval Militia, he rose to the rank of captain, eventually retiring as a rear admiral in the Naval Reserve. His name was even floated in political circles as a potential candidate for governor. Many memorable evenings unfolded within the walls of the Bradham Estate during these glory years. On one such night, the mansion blazed with light as Caleb and Charity hosted a grand reception for the town's elite. The year was 1912, and the occasion was the anniversary of Pepsi-Cola's founding. Elegant carriages lined the street outside as guests in fine dresses and tuxedos ascended the steps into the glowing foyer. Inside, the air was fragrant with roses and alive with the merry notes of a string quartet playing in the parlor. Silver trays bearing crystal glasses of champagne and delicate canapes floated through the crowd in the hands of liveried servants. Caleb moved through the gathering with an easy smile, shaking hands and exchanging jokes with politicians, businessmen, and naval officers alike. At one point, he tapped a spoon against a glass to call for attention, then raised a toast to his guests and to the prosperous future of their town. Laughter and cheers erupted as he proclaimed, "To progress, to friendship, and to our beloved Pepsi-Cola." In that moment, standing under the chandelier's warm glow with his family by his side, Caleb seemed to embody the very spirit of success. The mansion was not just his home, it was a stage upon which his dreams played out in splendid reality. In the summer of 1910, Caleb decided to celebrate his growing empire in grand style. He invited Pepsi-Cola bottlers from all over the country to convene in New Bern for a special gathering. For many of these franchise owners, it was the first time meeting the man who had concocted the drink fueling their own livelihoods. The climax of the convention was an evening aboard a magnificent yacht called the Elfrida. This vessel, once a gunboat in the Spanish-American War, now luxuriously refitted, glided along the dark waters of the Neuse River under a canopy of stars. On deck, Caleb played the gracious host. Dressed in a crisp white suit, he raised a glass of champagne, and of course bottles of Pepsi-Cola, with equal enthusiasm. The soft strains of a string quartet mingled with laughter and the clink of glasses as the yacht's wake fanned out in moonlit ripples. A gentle summer breeze carried the sound of celebration across the water. In that magical moment, Caleb Bradham was on top of the world. He gazed around at the gathering of colleagues, his extended Pepsi family, and felt a swell of pride. His creation had not only made him wealthy, it had bound together hundreds of people in a common dream. As the guests toasted to success that never ends, fireworks suddenly burst above the river, painting the night sky with blooms of red and gold. The revelers cheered, their faces lit with jubilation. No one on that boat could imagine, as they smiled into the darkness, that the fortunes of Pepsi-Cola and its founder would soon take a dramatic turn for the worse. By the early 1910s, even as Pepsi-Cola soared, dark clouds were gathering on the horizon of the world. By the early 1910s, even as Pepsi-Cola soared, dark clouds were gathering on the horizon of the world. In 1914, war erupted in Europe, and before long, the shockwaves reached American shores in unexpected ways. One of those ways was the price of sugar, the very lifeblood of Caleb's business. Sugar was to Pepsi what gold is to a mint. Without it, the drink could not be made. As global conflict raged, sugar became scarce and precious. Prices began to climb relentlessly. What once cost just a few cents a pound surged to unheard-of levels. By the end of the war, sugar prices had skyrocketed nearly tenfold. Caleb watched these developments anxiously from his offices in New Bern. At first, booming sales offset the rising costs. The American public, flush with wartime optimism, continued to guzzle Pepsi Cola even as ingredients grew more expensive. But as the price of sugar kept climbing, Caleb faced an agonizing decision. If he didn't secure enough sugar, he risked production grinding to a halt and leaving his bottlers dry. On the other hand, buying sugar at sky-high prices could spell disaster if the market turned. In the end, Caleb's confidence and optimism won out. He believed in Pepsi's momentum and in the post-war American appetite for his drink. So he made the fateful choice. He bought sugar, mountains of it. Warehouse upon warehouse was filled with sacks of sweet, white sugar, all purchased at a steep premium. For a time it seemed a wise move. Sugar only grew more scarce as the war dragged on. But then, almost overnight, the tide turned. The Great War ended in late 1918, and with peace came an abrupt collapse in demand. By 1919 and 1920, global sugar supplies normalized and prices plummeted. The market was suddenly flooded with cheap sugar from overseas. The value of Caleb's stockpile sank like a stone thrown into the Neuse River. Sugar that he had bought for 20 or more cents a pound was now selling for a fraction of that. The empire he had so carefully built was now balanced on a razor's edge. At first, Caleb refused to panic. He was a fighter by nature, and he had overcome adversity before. He tightened the company's belt and sought loans to bridge the gap, using his own wealth and reputation as collateral. Surely, he thought, the market would rebound or at least stabilize. In the mansion on Johnson Street, ledgers and balance sheets began to pile up on the mahogany desk in his study. Late at night, under the flicker of an oil lamp, Caleb would run the numbers over and over, brow furrowed, trying to find a way out of the labyrinth of debt that was slowly enclosing him. The same grand home that had been a symbol of his success became a front-row seat to his private anguish. Charity would find him there some nights, head in hands, surrounded by unpaid invoices and grim forecasts. She would gently squeeze his shoulder, and he would muster a reassuring smile. "We'll get through this," Charity would whisper, squeezing his shoulder, and Caleb would nod, even as worry shadowed his eyes. In truth, they both knew their fortune was teetering. On another late night in 1922, Caleb found himself at that same desk, a blank sheet of stationery before him, and pen trembling in hand. He was trying to draft a letter to his Pepsi Cola bottlers, a letter he had hoped never to write. How could he tell the men and women who had invested their livelihoods in his dream that Pepsi Cola was on the verge of collapse? The words wouldn't come. Again and again he dipped the pen and began, only to scratch out the sentences in frustration. He felt he had failed them all. The workers in the syrup plant, the salesmen on the road, the storekeepers who sold his bottles, and the franchise owners who had trusted him. In the stillness of the mansion's library, Caleb clenched his jaw and blinked back tears of shame and regret. The empire he'd built was crumbling, and all he could offer those who had believed in him were apologies. The inevitable could only be delayed for so long. As the early 1920s unfolded, it became clear that Pepsi Cola could not crawl out of the financial hole created by the sugar crash. Profits from soda sales, even though people still loved the drink, weren't nearly enough to cover the crushing cost of that overpriced sugar. Month by month, Caleb's company edged closer to insolvency. Creditors began knocking at the door, demanding payment. Some of the bottlers, once steadfast allies, started to panic. A few went out of business. Others scrambled to find different drinks to bottle in Pepsi's place. The tight-knit franchise family that had toasted on the Elfrida was fraying under the strain. As syrup shipments were cut and bills went unpaid, the unthinkable loomed on the horizon. Finally, on a warm spring day in 1923, Caleb Bradham bowed to the inevitable. With a heavy heart, he filed for bankruptcy. The news hit New Bern like a thunderclap. Townspeople read the headlines in disbelief. The Pepsi Cola Company, a shining success story they had watched rise from their own streets, was bankrupt. Caleb, the golden son of the city, was financially ruined. In the courthouse downtown, he signed papers relinquishing the business he had nurtured for 20 years. His trademark, his factories, his beloved formulas, all of it passed into the hands of receivers and auctioneers. The final price it fetched was a pittance of its former value. The Pepsi Cola trademark and assets were sold for only a few tens of thousands of dollars. barely enough to scratch the surface of what had been lost. As Caleb stepped out of the courthouse that day, the spring sunshine felt harsh and unforgiving on his face. He stood for a moment on the steps, looking out at the town that had cheered him in his ascent. Horses and Model T cars clattered by on the street, life moving on as if nothing had changed. But for Caleb, everything had changed. In a cruel echo of his own father's fate, Caleb now faced the same bitter financial ruin he had once seen strike his family in his youth. A few passers-by tipped their hats or offered sympathetic nods, but he could hardly meet their eyes. In his mind, he could still hear the pop of a champagne cork on the Elfrida, and the cheers of bottlers toasting to success. Now those sounds were phantoms, chased away by the reality that his dream had collapsed. The empire of Pepsi-Cola was no longer his. Amid the chaos of Pepsi-Cola's collapse, Caleb made sure of one thing, that his family would not be left homeless. Quietly, he transferred the deed of the big brick mansion to his wife and then to their eldest son, placing it beyond the reach of the company's creditors. The Bradham Estate would remain in the family's hands, at least for now. Yet even that act was poignant. On paper, the master of the house no longer owned his own home. The mansion on East Front Street became less a trophy of triumph and more a sanctuary from the storm. A place where the Bradham family huddled together as the financial tempest raged outside. In the wake of the bankruptcy, Caleb retreated to what he knew best. He returned to his first love, tending the counters of a pharmacy in New Bern as a simple druggist once more. Neighbors still greeted him respectfully on the street. After all, he was the man who invented Pepsi-Cola, and in this town that still meant something. But the glow that once surrounded him had faded. He was no longer the bustling executive or the generous host of yacht parties, but a humble pharmacist mixing cough syrups and filling prescriptions. Now in his middle age, with threads of gray at his temples, Caleb carried on quietly. Those who stopped by his store might find him still ready with a friendly smile and perhaps a fizzy soda or two. He never lost his touch at the fountain, but there was an undeniable sadness behind his eyes. Yet he bore his misfortune with quiet dignity. Caleb remained involved in the town's civic life where he could. Ever the philanthropist, he continued to support causes he cared about. Years before, at the height of his fame, he had endowed an annual prize for the top pharmacy student at his alma mater in Chapel Hill. Despite his reduced means, he kept that scholarship going, until shortly before his death, encouraging young pharmacists to pursue their ambitions. He also stayed active in the fraternal organizations that had long meant so much to him. In 1930, the Shriners honored him with the title of Recorder Emeritus of the Sudan Temple, recognizing decades of service. Whether in success or setback, Caleb Bradham never stopped trying to better his community. Meanwhile, the brand he had created went on a strange odyssey of its own. The investors in Richmond who bought Pepsi-Cola from Caleb tried to make a go of it, but lightning did not strike twice. Without its founder's guiding hand, the company floundered. Over the rest of the 1920s, Pepsi-Cola changed hands several times like a ship with no steady captain. By 1931, in the midst of the Great Depression, it fell into bankruptcy yet again. One winter morning that year, Caleb sat at the breakfast table of his New Bern home, a newspaper spread before him. Across the page, bold letters announced, "Pepsi-Cola bankrupt again." For a long moment, he simply stared at the headline. His son, Caleb Jr., glanced at him worriedly. The elder Bradham inhaled deeply and managed a faint, rueful smile. "It seems it wasn't just me after all," he said quietly, folding the paper with unsteady hands. There was sadness in his voice and a touch of vindication. The drink he had invented, the enterprise he had poured his soul into, had stumbled once more even under different management. In a way, that knowledge eased a small part of the burden on his heart. Perhaps the world had not been ready for Pepsi-Cola when he introduced it. "Maybe in another time," Caleb murmured, patting his son's hand before slowly rising from the table. The thought trailed off into silence. Outside, the barren trees of winter swayed in the cold wind as father and son stood in their quiet house, contemplating the fragile fate of the family dream. Such was the low state of Pepsi that its then owners even offered to sell the entire brand to Coca-Cola, hoping to salvage something from the wreckage. They made the offer not once, but 3 times, and 3 times Coca-Cola's executives looked at Pepsi's ledgers and declined to place a bid. To them, the Pepsi-Cola name was now tarnished, nearly worthless. It seemed that Caleb's dream was destined to die out after all. But fate is a curious thing. In 1933, a new owner emerged, a shrewd candy company president named Charles Guth. he acquired Pepsi's remains for a song, believing he could turn it around. In the depths of the Depression, Guth took a daring gamble of his own. He doubled the volume of a bottle of Pepsi, but kept the price at 5 cents, the same price competitors charged for half as much. Twice as much for a nickel became the tantalizing offer. Thirsty, cash-strapped Americans couldn't resist. By 1934, soda fountains and grocery stores were selling Pepsi-Cola in larger bottles that offered real value, and sales began to climb rapidly. A catchy radio jingle would soon further embed Pepsi in the nation's consciousness. Against all odds, the little drink that Caleb Bradham had mixed in his pharmacy was rising from the ashes. Caleb heard only faint echoes of this revival. In New Bern, he remained far from the centers of industry, tending to his customers and to his own health, which had begun to fail. He knew Pepsi-Cola still existed in some form. Occasionally, he'd read a snippet in the newspaper about the drink gaining popularity up north again. But the company was no longer his, and he had made peace with that. In truth, he likely never imagined just how enormous his brainchild would eventually become. As the Pepsi brand clawed its way back onto the national stage, Caleb's strength was ebbing. By the beginning of 1934, Caleb's health had deteriorated significantly. Always a stocky, vigorous man, he had become frail and thin. He tired easily and was often confined to his bed for days at a time. The people of New Bern sometimes saw him riding slowly by in an automobile, or leaning on the arm of his son during brief walks, his once brisk step now faltering. It was as if the burdens of the past decade had finally broken his body, even as his spirit quietly endured. In early 1934, misfortune struck yet another blow. A fire broke out one night at the old building on the corner of Middle and Pollock Streets, the very spot where Brad's drink had first been served 4 decades before flames consumed the remnants of Bradham's original pharmacy, reducing that birthplace of Pepsi to charred rubble. Caleb, now gravely ill, could only watch the glow of the conflagration from a distance, or perhaps hear about it the next morning. The loss was deeply symbolic. The physical starting point of his journey was gone. Only weeks later, on February 19, 1934, Caleb Davis Bradham passed away at the age of 66. He died in his bed, inside the cherished home on East Front Street that he had fought so hard to keep. In that quiet room surrounded by his family and the familiar furnishings of a life that had seen dizzying highs and crushing lows, Caleb's long struggle finally came to an end. On a gray February afternoon, friends and neighbors filed into New Bern's First Presbyterian Church to pay their respects. The somber notes of an organ drifted through the sanctuary as the wooden pews filled. Charity and the children sat in the front row, clad in mourning black, their eyes red-rimmed yet composed. As the minister spoke of Caleb's generosity and accomplishments, many in the congregation dabbed away tears. After the service, a cortege of cars and horse-drawn carriages slowly wound through town toward Cedar Grove Cemetery. The winter air was cold and drizzly, as if the heavens themselves were lamenting. Stores along the route briefly closed their doors, and townsfolk stood on the sidewalks, hats over hearts, while the procession passed. It seemed, for that day, all of New Bern acknowledged the passing of the man who had once put their little town on the map. They remembered him as a generous, kind-hearted man, an inventor, a Navy Reserve officer, a community leader, and a loving husband and father. The local paper ran an obituary lauding his accomplishments. But beyond North Carolina, the death of the originator of Pepsi-Cola merited little fanfare. The world was busy grappling with the Depression, and in the public imagination, Pepsi was now just a brand on a billboard, not the handiwork of the soft-spoken pharmacist from New Bern. In later years, Caleb's daughter Mary would recount that even after losing Pepsi, her father never lost faith in the drink's potential. He remained proud of his creation to the end. Later that year, the Bradham family made a poignant decision. With Caleb gone and the burden of maintaining a grand estate mounting, they sold the beloved mansion. In 1934, the house that had been the site of so many hopeful beginnings, joyous celebrations, and private sorrows passed out of the Bradham family's hands forever. New owners moved in, repainting the walls and arranging their own furniture where Caleb's had once stood. The mansion lived on, but its connection to the Pepsi legacy began to fade like a photograph left in the sun. In the decades after Caleb's passing, Pepsi-Cola would achieve a triumph beyond his wildest imaginings. The revitalized Pepsi took off in the late 1930s and never looked back. It became a fierce rival to Coca-Cola, going toe-to-toe in what came to be known as the Cola Wars. The company that had once sold for $30,000 grew into a multinational powerhouse worth billions. In 1965, Pepsi Cola merged with a snack maker to form PepsiCo, expanding into foods and international markets Caleb could scarcely have conceived. In gleaming corporate boardrooms a world away from New Bern, PepsiCo's executives strategize over global market share and quarterly profits. The company's advertisements feature world-famous pop stars and its logo blazes on neon billboards in Times Square, trappings of success that the humble Bradham could never have imagined. Pepsi has become a juggernaut, a faceless multinational giant far removed from the drugstore counter where it began. The personal family dream that once nurtured Pepsi has been replaced by the calculations of accountants and the ambitions of CEOs. Today, the Pepsi brand is recognized in the remotest corners of the globe, yet few who crack open a cold Pepsi on a hot afternoon know the name of Caleb Bradham or realize that the drink in their hand was born in a small-town pharmacy by the dreams of one determined man. Even long after his death, Caleb's hometown never forgot him. In 1998, a century after he christened Pepsi Cola, New Bern hosted a centennial celebration in his honor. A parade, fireworks, a memorabilia exhibit, even a stage play about Bradham's life brought the city's proud Pepsi heritage back into the spotlight. A local museum now occupies the site of his old pharmacy, letting visitors sip a Pepsi where Brad's drink was first poured. In Cedar Grove Cemetery, not far from the home he cherished, Caleb Bradham lies at rest beneath a modest headstone. Now and then, an admirer will place a Pepsi bottle on his grave in tribute, a gesture linking the modern beverage to its humble originator. As for the grand brick mansion on East Front Street, the Bradham Estate, it still stands, dignified and silent, a witness to all that transpired within and around it. Listed on the National Register of Historic Places, its walls have been carefully preserved, and its rooms, though privately owned, still whisper of the past. On quiet nights, one might wander by its iron gates and imagine the silhouettes of a bygone era. A young entrepreneur gazing out from the veranda, dreaming of success. Elegant guests arriving for a gala under the glow of carriage lanterns. Or an aging man peering from an upstairs window, wondering how it all slipped away. The mansion holds these memories like secrets within its bricks. Some in New Bern even claim that on especially still nights you can hear the faint tinkling of a piano from within, or catch a glimpse of a lone figure at an upstairs window, a wistful specter guarding the past. Whether one believes in ghosts or not, the sense of history and loss within the house is undeniable. The dark story of the Pepsi family mansion is not one of ghosts or crimes, but of something perhaps more haunting, the rise and fall of a dream. It is a story of ambition and innovation, of how one man's creation delighted a generation and then nearly vanished, all within his lifetime. It's the story of how a family's triumph turned into tragedy, and how the fruits of their labor slipped into the hands of others. But it is also a tale of legacy, how even in loss, Caleb Bradham's dream refused to die, instead transforming and growing beyond him. The Bradham Estate, with its grand facade weathered by time, stands as a poignant reminder that behind every famous brand lies the human heart that first gave it life. And though that heart may have ceased beating and that family's chapter closed, the echoes of their story endure, whispering from the rafters of an old mansion on a quiet street, and from the fizz of a cola that still bears a name born from a promise to cure indigestion, Pepsi Cola.